Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to a very special online event today. It's called Unveiling the Aramaic Jesus Within. Receive Yeshua's teachings to resurrect your heart and your divine human potential. My name is Stephen Dinan. I'm the founder and president of the Shift Network, and I'm truly blessed to be with you here, partially because Yeshua has been one of the most important inspirations for my own spiritual path. And I know there's so much mythology that's been built around Jesus and teachings that just isn't accurate. And so, what I really love about our faculty today is it helps to unveil deeper teachings that are have high fidelity to the original Aramaic, and it gives new insights into what was actually being taught and what we can actually embody in our lives now. So, our faculty member is named Neil Douglas-Klotz. He is a scholar in religious studies, spirituality, and psychology. He's taught a number of shift programs, and there's a real brilliant scholarly depth as well as a mystical heart that really is quite beautiful in how Neil teaches. So, Neil, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks, Stephen. Good to be back with you again.
Great. Well, I want to dive in and also mention up front that we are going to have a groundbreaking course launch with Neil soon called The Aramaic Jesus Within You. And we'll share more about that towards the end of the hour. And there's also going to be an opportunity to go still deeper into an advanced program that we'll share about as well. So, Neil, I want to start our time together this hour with a little bit about your journey into the Aramaic Jesus and to really open us to why this exploration is so important if we really want to receive the truest wisdom transmission that we can.
Thanks, Stephen. Well, how do you describe a life in 5 minutes? It's difficult because I didn't come to this, you could say, accidentally, or perhaps I did, but maybe it was synchronicity. You know, my parents were sort of alternative. They were more into alternative healing, chiropractic, Edgar Cayce, the American Mystic Channel, and the early ecological uh, farming movement. And but in order to sort of survive in our small village in Illinois, I was sent to a quite conservative elementary school, a conservative Protestant elementary school where we had to memorize large parts of the King James Bible and all of Luther's small catechism and all that stuff. So I had sort of this, how would we say, a conflict between the way I was being raised in my family and what I was learning on the outside. And so I developed a sort of inner feeling for who Jesus was for myself, but that didn't correlate, that conflicted with what I was being told, for instance, in my school or in Sunday school, things like that, and what Luther said about it and how he interpreted all these things. It didn't seem to me that, to my child mind heart, that this was really who Jesus actually was.
Mhm.
So, that after I went as far away from Christianity as I could go, because I felt I was being burdened with too much sin and guilt, uh, I eventually found my way into the writings of a mystic, an American mystic, Samuel Lewis, a Sufi, Buddhist who was also a Sufi, who wrote that he wanted to learn to pray the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic because that would reveal sort of the mystical, real spiritual depth of who Jesus really was. And it was one of those moments that just struck me, and I started to follow that thread down the rabbit hole and found out, who still knows Aramaic, what is Aramaic, why was this Jesus's language, all this stuff, and had a few people help me, and eventually, yeah, I I was fortunate to end up, with Matthew Fox supporting me in the late or mid '80s, or early '90s, and helped me get my first book published on really how Aramaic unveils who Jesus really was and clears up a lot of misconceptions about misunderstood, mistranslated sayings, uh, misused sayings, we could really say, uh, that seem to just put Jesus up in the sky, but not really make him or his teachings relevant for our own heart, our own consciousness. And that was really how I started to get into that. All this was, we're now going on 40 years ago. So I've been following this thread ever since, and uh, That's my life. That's it.
Well, we're grateful that you did follow that thread because I know each time I've talked with you, I feel like there's new insights. So maybe set up a little bit of a context of how Aramaic sort of even structures mystical language a little bit differently than we think of in English or even ancient Hebrew, and how that actually informed some of the things that Jesus was teaching.
Sure. I mean, that is the main thing, isn't it? I mean, Aramaic, like ancient Hebrew and like Quranic Arabic, the Arabic that's in the Quran, allows for multiple levels of meaning. That means a word for word translation is not really possible in order to be accurate, in order to give the full, you could say, spectrum, the full dimension of what the teachings are, or what the sentence or the psalm or the prayer says and what it means for us. So this led to, in the Jewish tradition, what's called midrash, different ways of unpacking, you could say, looking at all these different multiple levels. Uh, in Sufi Islam, there's also the same. It's called tawil, a different way of looking at the Quran, so you can see, all the different layers of meaning and what it means for one's life. This is really the most important thing. Christianity, Western Christianity, and I can talk more about this, sort of left Jesus's native language by the wayside, and this allows for that same spectrum of meaning. But very few people, I would say almost no one, had actually explored it before I went more deeply into it and actually did some academic study and got a PhD in ancient Semitic languages and all that good stuff in order just to sort of confirm for myself that what I was discovering was really something. It was not just for me, but it was something that I could and really should be sharing with other people because it just released me. It released tons of of burdens from my shoulders, from my child's shoulders about what Jesus was all about. And really, even more important than that, turned me back into myself to rediscovering a different level of heart, different level of consciousness, a new way to live life, more energy, more love, and more clarity, really.
Hmm.
So,
So I'd love to dive into some examples that help illuminate like how this more multidimensional understanding in Aramaic got collapsed into something that's actually quite far from the truth.
yeah. Well, it happens on a number of levels, and some of it is just, prepositions I would say, mistranslated because Aramaic uh, only has one preposition that means both within me and among us. That is, my community, my connection with my community, and my inner community, which we call our psyche or our subconscious. Those are always connected. Within and among is the same word. So when Yeshua talks about the so-called kingdom, which by its gendering in Aramaic should really be queendom, he's talking about the queendom that is within us and among us at the same time.
Hmm.
Likewise, he never asked people to believe in him. He asked people to believe and have trust the same way he had trust that there was this one big reality that we share not only with all human beings, but with the whole planet, with nature, with everyone. And so that was what he was requesting of people, not that they were going to believe, memorized beliefs about him or concepts about him.
Those are both fascinating. The queendom among us is quite
Oh
a
yeah.
different, angle to sort of enter into. That there's a feminine gendering, and so maybe share a little bit about how some of the translations actually sort of were taking in place in a context of some oftentimes other agendas of like wanting to depict Jesus in a certain way that wasn't as accurate.
Well, this is the evolution of different prophetic traditions, you could say, no matter where on the earth they originated, gradually over a period of time, and sometimes it's only within a generation or two, they get massaged, I would say, or forced into a institutional framework. In Christianity in the West, this happened, when the Emperor Constantine, 3 centuries after Jesus, decided to convert to Christianity and make this, that is, some form of Christianity, the official religion of the Roman Empire. And as I often say, you can't run uh, a decent empire based on ambiguity. You have to have one word means one thing, keep it simple, you know, make people afraid. There's always an enemy or someone you could conquer, all that stuff. Well, this stuff goes on around us today, as you can tell. But it, this is how it happened for Christianity. 3 centuries after Jesus, it got the form of Christianity that Constantine ended up choosing, or you could say fabricating with a group of collaborators, was one that was based in creeds, based in ideas, based in thoughts, not based in spiritual experience.
Hmm.
But unbeknownst to many people, or I would say most people, I didn't know about it, was that the largest group of Jesus people, we could call them early Christians, survived outside of the Roman Empire and stretched from, you could say, Persia all the way along the Silk Road, all the way to China. This was for 1,000 years the largest group of Jesus people, Christians you could call them, in the world, and they had nothing to do with the Roman Empire or these beliefs or ideas or creeds. It's just that they were so decentralized. It wasn't all one denomination. It wasn't all one group. It was a storytelling tradition. And as one of the people who survived and wrote a book about this in the early 20th century said, all these creeds of Western Christianity, we didn't have any of these. Our creed was what Jesus had: love your neighbor as yourself, and love God with all your heart and with all your being. And that was it. That was how we tried to live. So uh, you could say this decentralized sort of Christianity that existed outside the Roman Empire perhaps was not sustainable because it was decentralized, but at the same time, it lasted long enough such that, it was able to transmit, an inner reality from person to person to person. And that's the important thing.
Yeah, there's something about the that centralization of power that allows things to gain power over time, but to actually betray the deeper meaning. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit just more about sort of the worldview that emerges. So, I paint the big picture of like the Yeshua that you know through being a scholar of Aramaic and working with this is sort of what are some of the broad brushstrokes of what the essence of what he was teaching that are a little bit different than what we might have inherited.
For Yeshua, I mean, speaking simply, we have two two ways of breathing. One is just breathing with our breath within our physical bodies, within our who we believe we are, our self, so to speak, our sense of who I am, or who I am really. And the other is breathing with a bigger breath that is sort of around us. And that breath is, you could say, coextensive. It's shared with all other breathing beings, including non-human beings, with animals, with plants, with the ecology around us. I mean, it's no accident that most of Jesus's teachings not only happen in nature, he gives them in nature, but he uses many, many examples from nature to illustrate what he calls the queendom that is coming, the new sense of a consciousness that he wants to promote in people so that they get out of their small self, just thinking they know who they are, which is really, at his time, most of his listeners were an underclass. They were being dominated by the empire at that time, again, the Roman Empire of his time, and by the priestly class. So he was trying to break them free, break that real self free, like a mustard seed, as he talks about. Let it grow wild, let your real self grow wild. You discover then who you really are.
Beautiful. Well, definitely very aligned with that. And yeah, no, I know you were going to dive a little deeper into the I am sayings, and that's another great way to illuminate some of the difference in the depth, the metaphysical depth and multiple layers of what he was teaching versus what we actually received.
Sure, and these are some of the ones that I would say are most misunderstood, and I would say most mistranslated, because what Jesus says is, where it's translated I am, it's actually I. So two pronouns. There is no am. Uh, Am, are, is does not exist in the Aramaic language. End of story. He could not have said it. So he's really saying I is, for instance, ones that everyone always points to, the I, connecting my small self to that big sense of self I was just talking about, that is the way. That is the sense of the right direction, which was translated as truth. That is the life energy to travel. And he says, from my understanding, this is the way everybody goes. You connect your smaller sense of self with that bigger self that in various ways you can do that. And that's what shows you the right direction in your life and gives you energy to travel, even when you're not aware of it. It's what gives us life energy in our physical bodies. It's our sense of presence. It's that connection that renews at least while we're sleeping and not thinking about things and not planning, hopefully, but at least renews then. Otherwise, we wouldn't be alive in these bodies.
So when we translate "I am" the kind of egoic lens, "I am the way," it's like I'm this great Messiah, and he's really
Yeah.
saying, like, link yourself to your higher self, and that's the way to live your life.
Well, essentially, I mean, that's us. We've said it, The thing is that over the course of his teaching, he gives people various avenues of ways into that. In other words, he gives them, at least from my work, uh, various practices and almost a step by step, not necessarily that you have to follow just one way, but a step by step procedure to sort of gradually, connect deeper and deeper, connect more and more with your real sense of self, what Jung calls the fully individuated self. I tend to call it soul just to, distinguish it from our small sense of self, but it doesn't actually matter what you call it. It's this higher self or higher intuition, or I would say it's even more than just higher intuition. It's this bigger sense of who we actually are, which is both individual with our own individual life work and gifts and things to do, but it's also connected. And this is what he tried to give his students. And I think I think I'm not overstating the case to say that we're still working on it as a human species, because we're now more individualized and isolated than we ever were almost probably at any time in human history. So we
Hmm.
need to sort of balance and recover some of this ancient consciousness and ancient wisdom that Jesus was offering to folks.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. What do you want to share about the sort of some of the elements that are around spirit and breath and how that sort of becomes like a different way of understanding as well?
Spirit is this bigger breath that I alluded to. Yeshua calls it ruha, ruha, and it's sort of, you can feel in the sound that this is sort of an open sound. Ruha, and it's often translated as spirit. Holy Spirit is, for instance, excuse me, ruha de kudsha, those lovely oo sounds. And this is the place where my breath, you could say, my individual breath is felt sort of around me in my surroundings, my connections with folks that are important in my life, my neighborhood, and then it extends. My breath is really uh, connecting to the ecology around me, the neighborhood, and gradually this goes into you could say, in the stratosphere and beyond. And there's one breath then that is returning to being breathed by reality itself, using that story language that the ancients had, and that is Ruha de Kudsha. I call it sacred breath rather than Holy Spirit, because it makes it more intimate to with our own breath, and it is actually. The two breaths that I mentioned, the individual breath, which he calls nafsha, which would call self, or our sense of our individual self, and ruha are always connected. There's not like a dividing line between them. It's just that the nafsha is gradually, hopefully, finding itself within this bigger connected breath, which is not only about feelings of connection or feelings of compassion for others, but it's also an empowering breath. It's a breath that, as he says in the Gospel of John, will allow those who come after him to do what he has done and greater things. And so that's all possible from this connection of the small breath to the big breath, from ruha to nafsha, soul to self, if you want to put it that way.
Hmm.
So
That's really fascinating. It sort of links also with some of the concepts from the East, more about a kind of a universal chi life force that we can access through different practices as well.
Very much so. And actually, in most ancient cultures, you have a word like chi that means both breath and life energy. Chi is breath and life energy. Prana in Sanskrit is breath and life energy. Even in the Greek, and people like to point to the Greek versions of the Jesus's words. Well, even the Greek has the same thing, but it was translated out of it. Greek
Hmm.
has for its small breath self, it has the word psuche, excuse my, that starts with a P, that's what that psuche was. The psuche, from which we get our word psyche, psuche is this small breath self, our sense of our individualness, and pneuma, or P, with the P also, is that bigger breath self. But it was all just translated right out because the people doing the translation couldn't see it. And the earlier folks, say at the around time of Constantine, who were choosing the four gospels and you could say got rid of all the others, they didn't want to see it because it was too complicated. It adds too much ambiguity. As I say, you can't run an empire based on ambiguity. It has to be black and white, you and me, us and
Hmm.
them, you know. When,
And
when
also,
religion when religion gets in bed with empire, it's always a bad story. So, remember.
there's a lot of truth in that statement. When religion gets in bed with empire, it's always a bad story. Well, and it just gets into the whole nature of power as well within spiritual circles. Often, so often we're trying to elevate the prophetic, the Messiah above everyone else, and it sounds
Yeah.
like that's really accurate with what Yeshua actually taught.
No, and it's not. And then it led to an overreaction, which is, and I worked in the scholarly realm for many years, a reaction by the scholarly realm starting about 100 years ago, where they're just going to make Jesus into an everyday, normal human being, not a mystic. No, he's not a mystic. He's not having visions. He's just a revolutionary peasant who got on the wrong side of the law. And then later, he had a PR agent and they made books up about him. And then boom, then you have a religion. So, for a lot of Western theology, Jesus is just sort of up in the sky somewhere, and we're supposed to believe things about him. And for a lot of the current scholarly biblical world, he's just, a person, and no one really wants to talk very much about him except to, write a new book about how ordinary he was. So, where's the place for mysticism or spirituality? As I was telling Matt Fox, on one of these things, I said Aramaic only has one word for both the mystic and the prophet. So the mystic is always a rabble rouser. He's always causing trouble. That's where the life energy to do these things comes from. It comes from vision. It comes from this bigger sense of a connection. So that's it.
What are some other areas that you feel like are important areas of mistranslation that we need to start to upgrade?
Well, I mean, one of the other ones we really need to deal with is this sort of saving our soul thing.
Hmm.
Um, Jesus never asked us to save our soul. If you look at the Aramaic, he asked to let our soul, which I would say is the translation of is ruha in these cases, let your ruha save you. And by save, he doesn't mean, buy you a penthouse in heaven in the afterlife. He means, show you what your purpose in life is. This is his main focus. To save in Aramaic, which I won't give you the Aramaic of that, actually means to show one what one's heart purpose is, what one's heart is really leading to from its depth. We all come into this life, into these lives, these bodies in time and space, with certain gifts, with certain backgrounds. Some we need to overcome, that is background. Some gifts we need to uncover. But we come in, with something to give, something to offer. In some traditions, they call it a transaction to make with life. Okay, I got a body, so I'm going to offer this back. So it's about what you love is what you serve. What you serve is what you love. And again, in Aramaic, to serve and to love really are one of the words for love is really based on, how we serve in life. What we really love is how we serve. As Rumi said later in the Sufis, he said, "Let the beauty you love be what you do." So
That makes a lot of sense. Well, it's fascinating. Just keep asking you questions, and I know you wanted to take us into a bit of an experiential taste of,
Oh yeah.
because part of the magic here isn't just the words; it's also the spirit that's moving through, and you do so much beautiful work with song as well.
We should do that. Yeah, no, you're right. Because I don't want to just be talking at people. You know, we're, yeah, I talk at them. I give them some of the hidden history, all that stuff. But then we go into individual phrases that people can use in meditation. We chant a bit. We breathe with the words. You know, people say, well, Neil, you're adding these things later. Well, we have to add these things later because we no longer have that ancient sense of consciousness, which already was much more interconnected with ecology, with the community, with family, was already less individual than what we have 2,000 years later. So yes, I add somatics, body awareness, some chanting, some breath meditation, and we'll do a bit of that now, Stephen. All right. I'm trying to keep it simple. So we're going to use a phrase, again, one of the misused phrases. Jesus says to his students, "You are the light of the world, a city on a hill." And this has been used by political parties, by countries to mean, okay, this country is supposed to be a shining city on a hill, and so then we dominate everyone else, and all these sorts of notions that get layered onto Christianity even today. Well, Jesus will chant part of this. He says, Antun anwun, nuhre de alma. Nuhre de alma. The key word here is nuhre, which is the word for light. And he doesn't mean only physical light here. He means the light through all of our senses. The light that allows us to smell, touch, taste, feel, have body awareness. This is, for the ancients, light. So he says, you are this light that is coming through your senses, illuminating the world around you, allowing you to know it. Remember that. You're supposed to be this light and not be enclosed in what you could say in unknowing, in darkness. Now, darkness is not evil in Aramaic or in the ancient Semitic traditions. It just means what we don't know, what remains unknown, what's in the dark. Whereas nuhre is a sense of light that not only comes through the senses, but is the senses. So we want to use the word, one of Jesus's words, to help clear our senses and clear our heart, so that then we can really see and feel and touch and taste and feel from the heart much more deeply. So we'll dive into this just a little bit. We'll chant a bit, and then we'll breathe with the key words, which I think we're just going to breathe nuhre. Yeah, we're just going to breathe nuhre. So come along with me, and I'm going to be leaning from side to side at some point. The main reason I'm doing that is that I'm moving from my heart, that is from down here. You can't see my hand, but here it is, down here in the heart area. And I'm trying to, with my eyes sort of half closed, allow my body awareness to fall out of the head into the heart. This is very important. We walk around all day in the head, or many of us do. Looking at phones makes it even worse. And so we're not really feeling from the heart as we walk through life. Whereas for Yeshua, it's possible actually to see through the eyes of the heart, hear through the ears of the heart. This isn't just metaphor. This is actually body awareness possibility. And some scientists are rediscovering this today. The heart is an intelligence center, not just a feeling center. Okay, antun, that means you are. You. Anwun, you are, you could say becoming, because there is no word for are. Becoming nuhre de alma. Alma means that which we see, that which we sense, that we touch, the different levels of the world. It can mean, what we imagine the different levels to be, our different roles in life or in our family, in our community, but it also allows us to distinguish clearly, truth from falsehood, or what is ours to do and what is not ours to do. All these things, very important. Antun, anwun, at least it rhymes. Nuhre de alma, nuhre de alma. Do your best or just hum along. And here we go. Antun, anwun, nure, nure, de alma antun anwun nure 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 de alma antun anwun nu re nu re nu re de alma antun anwun nu re nu re nu re de alma antun anwun nure 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 de alma antun anwun nure 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 de alma. Okay, so allow your eyes to close for just a moment. I'm doing the same. And we're going to breathe with that central word, nuhre, nuhre. That's a lovely breathing H sound in the middle of it. Nuhre. It is the light, it is the fire of our consciousness. Aramaic only has one word for fire and for light, and that is nuhre or nuhra. We're breathing in the heart, which is where our inner heart fire begins. And we're allowing the surface of the heart to become more and more clear as we breathe in nuhre, we breathe out nuhre, just feeling the sounds of the word coordinating with breath. And if you're able to do this, be placing one hand lightly over the heart, feeling your own heartbeat to allow your body awareness to drop down there. So beginning from the heart, which is where the nuhra, you could say, is channeled through, where it comes from the source that is beyond us. It's not just a function of our nervous system. Our nervous system comes from that nuhra. It's created by it. So we breathe nuhra now into our sense of touch. You could feel how you're sitting, the weight, how you're supported through the sense of touch underneath, touch through your clothing, through your skin, breathing nuhre, clearing sense of touch from anything that is no longer needed. Old remembrances of unhealthy touch we can begin to clear in this way. Nuhre, nuhre. And then breathing now with our sense of taste. This is not only the taste of food, but what the ancients would call our taste for life. Perhaps we have a bitter or a sour taste of life from things that have gone on in the past. So using the word nukhre, we can begin also to clear that. Again, it's as though the radiance, the clearing radiance, the healing radiance is happening from the depths of the heart. That light, that healing light shining into our taste for life. And from taste into smell, which are connected, even on our physical level, so to speak. Sometimes we say something smell bad in our life, okay, we should stay away from it. So we allow our sense of smell to also be cleared, healed, harmonized, breathing nukhre from the heart into our smell, sense of smell. A few more breaths now. We breathe nukhre into our hearing. We want to be able to hear clearly what is ours to do in life, which is an inner voice, as well as hear clarity in the voice of others. Can we trust our heart? Can we trust the clarity streaming from our heart into our hearing to allow us to hear what is actually true, what is actually clear, and what is not true? What is what Jesus would call bisha, or unripe? Can we hear the ripe from the unripe? And then finally we come back around to seeing. So we allow our eyes to close just slightly half open, breathing nukhre into our sense of seeing. We ended with this one because it's the one that's the most dominant in modern culture. But again, with allowing a heart breath, a healing heart breath, to stream the light, stream nukhre, a clarity in all the senses through our seeing. Let's spiral back into the heart now, breathing nukhre in the heart. Again, this is a process we can continue at any time. For Yeshua, it begins with awakening the heart to the life, light, love energy that is always streaming through it from the first beginning, from before birth, and this streaming continues and carries us on after physical death. Nukhre de Alma, light of all the worlds, all the levels. Amen, amen, amen.
Beautiful. Well, it's just I love the music. It really kind of transports us back into the Middle East, and it's sort of the whole vibe. And you can feel the kind of some of the echoes and how Sufis pray now too. And it's just like there's this beautiful way of kind of a kind of ecstatic circling of energy too.
Yes, again, they have it in the Sufis, you have it in the Hasidic tradition and some branches of the Hasidic tradition. Um, you know, you could say in some gospel traditions of Christianity, you do have this. Um, but again, in most of Western Christianity, not really. We have hymns, and they're,
Hmm.
as one person once put it, somewhat lugubrious. That is, somewhat, they tend to make you sad even when they're happy, because there's a lot of hell and damnation in them. So,
So there's clearly not a lot of hell and damnation in the original Aramaic. It seems like that.
no, no. He says, I haven't come to, to judge you, to divide you. I've come to bring you
Yeah.
together in your heart and in your bigger sense of who you really are.
Mm. I'd love to build on that a little bit. It's like bringing you together in the heart. And so the heart is obviously in everything from depictions of Jesus with the Sacred Heart to much of what you said. I wonder if you can illuminate some of the teachings around the centering in the heart and the spiritual activation of the heart that come through in the Aramaic more clearly than in what we've received.
It's really there. It's just that it gets ignored because even if you look at the King James Version, Stephen, Yeshua says, it's out of the heart that thoughts are arising, unripe thoughts, feelings, emotions. So for the ancients and in the Aramaic language, there is only a word for heart. There is no word for mind. Let me underline that and boldface it. There is no word for mind in Aramaic. So it was
Hmm.
only heart. It all had to do with on the surface of the heart, we have our thoughts, our emotions, and then the depth of the heart is that secret back doorway into our ruha, the bigger sense of ourself, our soul, which connects us with everything else. Now, the prayer of the heart, which we find in the Hesychast tradition, it is the early Orthodox tradition, and it's still used today in some centering prayer traditions. This ultimately does come from the Middle East and from the Aramaic Yeshua, I would say, and then comes, moves east. And so you have this prayer of the heart that survives. Uh, in somewhat, you could say, I know Matt Fox doesn't like this. The Sacred Heart, sometimes becomes overly sentimentalized, but it is a real thing. It is an actual feeling that Christians can have, and uh, many of the early Christian mystics write about this Sacred Heart. Mechthild of Magdeburg, Julian of Norwich. Meister Eckhart doesn't talk so much about heart, but he talks more about connecting with, our real sense of self a lot. So, this is a tradition that continued on through various people, but you know, it was somewhat few and far between, actually. I mean, we owe a lot of the beautiful art, music, poetry, mystical sayings in Christianity to this, you could say, this ongoing transmission of heart and breath. And now it's up to all of us to step up and, to that consciousness as well, because we need it.
Mm. I want to ask you a little bit about the masculine and feminine because it was very interesting when the first things you said around translation more as the queendom, and so there's a lot of the Jesus teachings and lineage that's really gotten reinforced a more patriarchal kind of pattern in the world. Maybe just share a little bit about your perspective from Aramaic of
Sure.
what of that.
Yeah, well, Aramaic is a very gendered language. It has masculine, it has masculine, feminine, and you could say either both, both or neither. Um, and it's sort of a both. There's a both and one too. Uh, invariably, the feminine words in Jesus's language, and this is true actually in the Greek too, the Greek version of the New Testament, the feminine words get translated as masculine. Kingdom is the key amongst that. It's feminine in Aramaic, it's feminine in Greek. They made it masculine in the translations. There are many other feminine gendered words. Ruha is one of them. That is the word for breath is feminine. Nafsha, or small breath, that's feminine. Jesus uses the word hakima or hakimta as the word for wisdom, which points to holy wisdom, hukhma in the Hebrew tradition, also feminine and an important, you could say, reality, an important archetype in his teachings. You could say that that breath, that sacred sense that unites all of our senses. We were going there a bit at the end of that meditation. We were going into the arms of what I would call sacred sense, holy wisdom, into her arms. So the feminine is all over. Um, there's neuter there too, but invariably the feminine got translated masculine, the neuter got translated masculine, the masculine got translated masculine, and there we are. You know,
Yeah. It's clear there's so many layers of what's gone awry, or maybe we learned our lessons from it, but now it's time to learn something truer and deeper, which
it's
is
time.
more.
It's
It's
time, Stephen.
time. It's totally time. So let's talk a little bit about how people can go deeper into so much of harvesting from this scholarship and practice that you've really been embarking on for 40 years now. and in your groundbreaking course, which I know is just such a blessing for folks who choose to join. So Neil's going to be teaching this course. It's called the Aramaic Jesus Within You. Receive Yeshua's final teachings and live into your divine human potential. You can find it at the URL AramaicJesusWithin.com. Aramaic is Aramaic, AramaicJesusWithin.com. This is a 7-week program, and there is an advance that we'll talk a little bit about as well that really gives you foundational understandings to shift whatever paradigm you've inherited, or if you didn't grow up within Christianity, really coming to it with fresh eyes, to give you a direct mystical ignition in this tradition that's more of a bridge directly to the heart of Jesus rather than it mediated through a lot of other translation steps and other agendas. So, Neil, I'd love for you to share in your own words what some of what you intend for people to come away from this program with, and then we can go through the modules and give a preview of what's coming.
Well, I mean, I intend nothing short of a complete transformation of their consciousness, actually. I think, so, I have high hopes. I know it's possible for me. I know it's possible for them. I had to meditate long and hard about how to do this course. So finally, I came to a way to do it that I think is important. We follow a trajectory, shall we say, of Jesus in about the year or so before he leaves, trying to urgently impart to his students how they can survive in the sense of a connection after he is physically gone. In other words, how can they find their Jesus within? You could say their Ruha within. And he uses various, you could say, actions, various sayings, various teachings, some of them quite cryptic, to direct them in that line. It's paradoxical, I would say, that it's either some of the most mistranslated sayings of Jesus, like "I am the way, the truth, and the life." They're translated in a way that is exclusive. Jesus is the only way. You have to believe in Jesus. And at the same time, when you unpack them in Aramaic, they are you could say, his most mystical, his most spiritual, his most transformative, I would say, for us today. So that's my goal in this course.
That's a great goal. Module 1, in beginningness, opening to the seen and unseen worlds of Yeshua, where miracles naturally arise.
Well, this allows me to, bring folks up to speed if they haven't, worked with my Aramaic Jesus things before. Gives us the whole, the place. I try to place people within, you could say, the cosmos, the universe, the ecology of Jesus, and at the same time, we're beginning to go through we're going through the Gospel of John, in parallel with the Gospel of Thomas, one of the Gospels that was forbidden or outlawed after Constantine made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. And we'll be using a few of the other non-canonical Gospels as well. So in beginningness is about, okay, how do we connect with where we came from, where we're going? This is what the ancients were concerned with. Where were we before birth? Where are we going after death? Well, this is still an experience people can have. It's not a flight into light. This is a realization that we can have fully while in the body, in time and space, that basically accomplishes a heck of a lot for us if we touch that.
Module 2, Word becoming flesh, waking up to the light and love within our humanity.
That's it. So as I said, it's not a flight into light. This is continuing a bit further into John, where it says in the usual King James Version, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Again, this word is usually identified just with Jesus himself personally, but it's not. The Word is a sense of our consciousness. Our consciousness creates words and meaning. How do we do that? Well, by perceiving the world in a particular way. By perceiving the world around us in a particular way, we make up words. We make up meanings. For the ancients, they didn't just see a tree as a tree. They saw a tree as a living being, not only as a living physical being, but as a living physical and non-physical being, a tree spirit, if you will. And that's just a simple example. So this consciousness is becoming flesh. It's becoming flesh within us. How do we maintain the connection to where we came from and illuminate the life that we're having right now?
Module 3, Preparing the Way. John, Jesus, and Temptation as gateways to awaken your inner guidance and resilience.
Well, we take the story a little further. This is about Jesus' baptism by John. I have some other things by Thomas here that are equivalent. And then Jesus goes off in the wilderness and he has this temptation sequence. So again, he's tempted by various, you could say, unholy beings in the other world. Well, we take a look at what this was really about in the ancient world. How are we influenced by, how do we say, unseen influences in our world, whether through the internet or otherwise? How do we participate when we're, you could say, in this mental emotional miasma that's surrounding us today? How do we clarify, send back what is not for us, and affirm what is really more part of ourself? So we'll be working with some protection practices also in this particular module, very important at this stage of the journey.
Module 4, Reborn from the Beginning. The Serpent in the Wilderness and the Renewal of Your Creative Life Force.
Here we go. So this is for the born agains. This is the whole little story where Jesus says to Nicodemus, you must be born from the first beginning. And this is what was translated as you must be born again. So again, to be born again ends up being a concept. It ends up being, you could say, it's not for everybody, but ends up mainly being about believing certain thoughts about Jesus. I mean, sometimes there is a real renewal through baptism, where a person can have this feeling of being born again and a new life. I'm not naysaying that, but Jesus is pointing to being born back from where you started, from before you came out of your mother. Feel that big creation energy from which you came. And this ties him into a very long tradition in, you could say, very early Jewish mysticism. And also there's some beautiful sayings in Thomas about standing at the beginning that are similar. So we go into that. There's this thing about the serpent in the wilderness, which is supposed to point to him being crucified. It's actually about something else. So again, partially I'm unpacking, unlayering things, clearing the rubble from some of these sayings of Jesus, and then showing how they illuminate how we can open a new door in our consciousness.
Module 5, For God So Loved the World, Receiving the Living Waters that Restore the Heart and Unify Heaven and Earth.
A mashup of two things here. One is, again, more from Jesus' sayings that have been used ad nauseum. For God so loved the world, and so forth, that we see sometimes posted on signs in football stadiums, things like that. So again, usually pointing to believe in Jesus, become a Christian, join this group, whatever. Jesus is not talking about that. He's talking about an integrated, fully realized soul and self human being. That's what the universe and what reality, God, so to speak, which Jesus calls Allah, that's what reality wants to create, a fully realized human being. That's us. And then the second part of this module has a beautiful little story about Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. There's a lot of wonderful stuff about that, and about the water of life and which direction you should turn your heart when you pray, and lovely stuff like that. There's also really for us, it's about how we turn our heart when we go to pray, meditate, do whatever. So it's not just about what happened 2,000 years ago, it's about us.
Module 6, Troubled Waters and a Voice in the Storm, Awakening the Power of Your Soul to Find Calm Amid Chaos.
Okay, now we're talking. So this is one of these stories where Jesus finds his students in a boat fishing in the middle of the night, and there's a big storm, and he walks on the water, and he calls out to them, be not afraid, which actually is a poor translation from the Aramaic. And he basically is saying, don't just buy into what appears around you. Use your deeper consciousness to help transform that. And that's what he helps them do. So we go into that a bit, and this is also piggybacking on one of his feedings of the 5,000, which is where we go in the last module in the 7-week course.
And finally, Module 7, The Bread of Life, Nourishing the Soul to Awaken Your True and Sovereign I.
We go a little deeper into the so-called I am statements of Jesus. I am the bread of life is the central one here. What is he really talking about here? Again, it's not about him personally, how does our sense of connection create food for us? Not just metaphoric food, but how do we bring this into how we're nourished in our life, for our bodily life, our emotional life, our mental life, all these things. And how do we begin to connect in a deeper level and more embodied level with this real sense of ourself, a new, you could say, reborn sense of consciousness.
Well, what an amazing program. And I know this is just such a blessing for those who chose to go through it before. And now this new version will be, I think, go even deeper. So I want to share a few things about this that we haven't covered yet. So first of all, you get not only the 7 90-minute live sessions with Neil, which includes time to ask your questions live. You also get recordings of every session, both video and audio, as well as word-for-word transcripts to work with, study, and highlight. There's weekly practices for home. There's a community group to support you and deepen your experience. And I also do want to mention at this point that there is going to be an advanced 14-week program that you can sign up for. It's on the page. We're not going to go through all the details about it. If you pre-register for the advanced to give you this really deep dive of a full 21 module journey, you're going to get a $100 discount on the bundle if you sign up now. So, Neil, maybe share a little bit about what you're planning to do with the 14-week module program, at least on a high level.
Yes, thanks, Stephen. I mean, again, I had to meditate about how to do this whole journey, and I knew I needed to break it in about a third of the way through so that people had time to settle with what they'd received so far, and then we could go on. So there's about a 40-day gap between the end of the 7-week course, the beginning of the 14, and the 14, we start up where we left off with John and Thomas and Jesus's journey. We end up, with his last talk with his disciples, his students at the so-called Last Supper, the many mansions that he's preparing, so to speak, all that stuff. And, I am the vine, you are the branches, all these beautiful sayings, possible scenarios around the crucifixion, the resurrection, and what happened next. So we take it step by step. And the advantage of a course like this is that you can, week for week, do a bit of practice in between the modules, and you will get a lot. I mean, ordinarily, I only give this sort of material within in-person seminars, and that allows me to do other things and do sort of a blitz approach. But this allows us, you can see the advantage of step by step, deepen a bit week by week, take a 6-week gap, and then we start in again. And, over the course of, I don't know how much it is, 5 months or 6 months, something like that, this is a real transformative experience. And I'm really looking forward to sharing this with folks and having folks join me.
Hmm. Well, so exciting. What an amazing program and an opportunity to go in this very deep journey into the Aramaic Jesus. And given like so many of us grew up in Christianity, moved away, coming back to a deep spiritual path, this is important medicine for us. And for those who didn't grow up in Christianity, it's also just a revelatory to really get this direct mystical transmission from the actual words, the actual practices that Jesus taught. So what a blessing. I also want to mention there are some bonuses that are going to go with this 7-week program, not even including the longer journey. On the page, you'll see there's a video conversation with Neil and Matthew Fox, who is really one of the preeminent mystical religious leaders in Christianity. It's called Jesus Before Christianity, super high value. You want to share anything about that bonus?
Yeah, that was a nice little talk I had with Matt about, who is this person? I often say I'm talking about the Jesus before Christianity. I borrowed that title from one of his Dominican compatriots, actually, from the title of a book. But yeah, there was a Jesus before Christianity. There was, you could say, a shamanic, mystical, spiritual figure, whatever you want to call it, prophetic figure. And Matt and I sort of riff a bit, about that, and Matt makes some connections to the later mystics that
Hmm.
happened in Christianity, which are really his speciality.
That's a super exciting bonus. Then there's a second bonus called The Hidden Gospel 25 Years Later. These are PDF excerpts from Neil's book called The Hidden Gospel. You want to share anything about what you've shared there?
Yes, my publisher was bought by another publisher, and they wanted to redo this book of mine, The Hidden Gospel, which came out, well, I think about 26 years ago. So with this excerpt that I'm sharing with folks, I look back at what has changed over the last, say, well, 26 years, let's say, and things that I would redo, which I did redo in the new version of the book, and just reflect on, yeah, what we really need from Yeshua, what he's trying to offer to us, and how most of mainstream religion and most of mainstream biblical studies scholarship has failed us in this regard. So it's up to us to renew Yeshua in our consciousness so we experience what one could call a second coming, around us in each other rather than waiting for some hero figure to come and rescue us.
Mm. Great bonus there. And then the final bonus, which is available for folks who sign up right away. We always like to do this to give a little extra encouragement for you to tune in now, make your decision about moving forward. And again, there's more details on AramaicJesusWithin.com. And if you move forward today, you're going to get a video conversation with Neil and Chloe Goodchild, another Shift faculty, very beloved, called The Aramaic Jesus and the Naked Voice, Sacred Sound, Healing, and Compassion. Brings in the musical side of this, which I think is really beautiful. You want to share more about that dialogue?
Yeah, that was a lovely conversation I had with Chloe. I mean, I don't often talk about this with someone unless they're really in that field as Chloe is, but the mystical use of sound, vibration in our bodies. Chloe is, of course, that's her main field, but it's also been a main, you could say, passion of mine, not only in the chanting that I offer, but also, you could say, in meditations on the inner sound as they occur in the Middle Eastern tradition. Chloe's main background is, of course, in the Far Eastern tradition. So we share a bit about that, and I can't remember if I do a practice there or not, or maybe she does. But anyway, it's a fabulous conversation, very unusual actually, and very, I found it really enlivening.
Hmm. What a beautiful offering that is as their special bonus when you sign up by midnight tonight. So it's clearly going to be an amazing program. You can find all the more details at Aramaic Jesus Within. We've kept the investment very accessible. It's just three payments of $128, or you save 10% when you pay in full with one payment of $349. The course is going to start January 15th and run Thursdays at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. But even if you can't make the live times, you can still get the full value with the recordings and transcripts in the community. So there's some beautiful testimonials about Neil's work. There's so many grateful students from previous courses. So you're in really good hands, and you'll just really illuminate things that you never even considered about this lineage and tradition, and to really give you the mystical straight scoop on what Jesus actually taught and how that can empower you now. So again, it's all at AramaicJesusWithin.com, and you'll get that special bonus when you sign up by midnight tonight, which is the Aramaic Jesus and the Naked Voice. So Neil, it's always a pleasure to be with you. We're nearing the end of our time. Anything still on your heart you want to share with folks who are considering doing this course with you?
Yes, I mean, this again does not repeat anything I've done, even on previous audio series or even in any of my books. As with all of my previous shift courses, one was on the Aramaic prayer, one was on Yeshua's Beatitudes. This one also takes it beyond what I've offered in any book or in any audio series, and really bring things up to date for me, but also in terms of the best that I can offer in terms of conveying what Jesus's transmission actually was, because I feel it's very important that we, follow something like this to transform our human consciousness all over the world. And, people who have some heart feeling for Yeshua are a large part of the world population.
Mm.
This is for you, whether you've been in one of my courses or not. You're welcome.
Mm. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Neil, and thank you so much for joining all of us. And again, if you would like to go further into Neil's deep scholarship and mystical transmission, you can do so at AramaicJesusWithin.com. Many
Thank you,
blessings.
Stephen.